Minister Bheki Cele and Police Commissioner General Khehla Sitole have written to the Constitutional Court. They're asking that if they could be allowed not to arrest former President Jacob Zuma pending the outcome of his rescission application. The court last weekend, you'll remember, handing down a 15-month sentence for Zuma's defiance of an order to testify before the State Capture Commission of Inquiry.
So in a letter that you can see on your screens there, authored by a state attorney representing Khehla and Sitole, the pair write the following. I'm going to start with paragraph 2. It gives some background to what it's asking from the court. It says, we've been instructed by our clients to write to the Honourable Acting Chief Justice, that's Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, in view of the recent developments in the matter in which the Honourable Court has found Mr. Zuma guilty of a crime of contempt of court and accordingly sentenced, upon which a warrant of committal was issued. Paragraph 3 continues. It says the Minister of Police and the National Commission of the SAPS have been ordered to take all reasonable steps that are necessary and permissible in law, essentially to effect an arrest warrant for him to start serving his sentence.
So in those 2 paragraphs, they've given us a sense of what's taken place, what's expected from them, and giving us an idea of why they're writing this letter to the Constitutional Court. The real meat of this letter comes in paragraph 7. They say, and I'm going to read it verbatim, it's in our client's view that the pending litigation has a direct impact on the action which they should take in terms of the Constitution, in terms of the court order, I beg your pardon, on the basis that the very court order has become the subject of litigation in both courts. This is where I think the rubber hits the road. Our clients are fully aware that the litigation steps taken by Mr. Zuma cannot be characterized as appeal processes, which in usual cases would have an effect of suspending the operation of a court order. They essentially, if you ask me, are being preemptive of what the response to this letter might be. They're saying, yes, Constitutional Court, we're asking to hold off the arrest until the litigation is done, even though we appreciate that the litigation is actually not an appeal. It's only in the case of an appeal that something like perhaps an arrest would be stayed, right? If you ask me, if you're aware of that as the police, why make the request to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. Our political editor, Spoongal, this morning making an important point, that appeals processes also quite often and routinely can take place from prison.
Right. Right, which has been some of the commentary we've heard over the last little while as well. In fact, the police minister has spoken out about this in some respects. You also remember Cele yesterday telling reporters that the Constitutional Court will need to clarify how the police should actually proceed on this matter while there are 2 pending litigations. We know the litigation in the Pietermaritzburg High Court later today and the one in the Constitutional Court on Monday. Let's take you back to that moment.
The police were given the timeline of Wednesday, 12 midnight. So actually our 3 days started 12 midnight. We out of 72 days, we still have got a lot of hours. In between, there will be a court tomorrow. That will be day after our day, and will be a day after. It's before and after. So we don't have crisis of time. But also we hope that we'll be getting the clarification, because when we were given the instruction, there were no other legal activities taking place. As the South African police, the ministry, as we instructed with the commissioner, we have sought the better clarification. Are we waiting for the new activities that are happening in court, or we continue as the present instruction? So we have time on that one. I don't think we need to rush.
So it will be interesting to watch how the Pietermaritzburg High Court will handle this matter, as the former president has indicated that the arrest was unjust. He's also pleaded ill health and poor legal advice.
I really must be clear. I'm not asking for sympathy, but justice. My age and health condition and any other mitigating circumstances were not considered when the imprisonment was decided.
All right, so this is the take-home about what's actually happening. When you woke up this morning, all you expected was for this litigation to be heard in the Pietermaritzburg High Court, where the former president is trying to give reasons why his arrest should be stayed until the litigation in the Constitutional Court. The new information as we speak this morning is this letter that we've just read to you. Police Minister Bheki Cele now writing to the Constitutional Court, asking them to give him permission not to arrest the former president by the time his deadline lapses, which is tomorrow midnight. He is saying, the police minister, that the litigation in its totality should come to some kind of finality before he then acts. Important to mention, it's just the letter, it's not necessarily court papers, and one wonders whether or not it'll feature in any way when this litigation all takes place. Interesting to also point out the optics around the Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo being the acting Chief Justice at the moment, and how he is an implicated person in this entire saga. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a big developing story that we're tracking for you. In fact, let's take you live now to the former president's hometown in Nkandla. That's where we find our senior political reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo. I mean, arguably, Ziyanda, this letter from Police Minister Bheki Cele throws a spanner in the works.
Absolutely, and somewhat giving the former president a lifeline, if you will, given the fact that the police minister is asking for the Constitutional Court to actually conclude then the application, hearing the rescission application, which will be heard next Monday, before he acts. We know that tomorrow, Wednesday, midnight, would have been the deadline for the police minister and the National Commissioner to actually execute the Constitutional Court judgment by arresting former President Jacob Zuma after that 15-month jail sentence was handed down. And I think there were so many complications, Michelle, because even if, you know, the KZN division of the Pietermaritzburg High Court ruled that they don't have a jurisdiction, the police minister and his executive would have still been placed in a compromised position, because they would have still needed to actually execute that order. Otherwise, they would have been in contempt of court. And so what we're waiting for now, I suppose, Michelle, is to hear then what the Pietermaritzburg High Court will say, given the implications of perhaps the Pietermaritzburg High Court, you know, if they were to say, for an example, that they want to stay the arrest, we know then that that would set a precedent where a lower court now interferes or interdicts, I should say rather, the orders of a higher court. And so many are saying the likelihood is that the Pietermaritzburg High Court will not rule in favor of the former president by virtue of the issue of jurisdiction. In fact, that's also the argument that is being made by the State Capture Commission of Inquiry in their responding papers, saying that this particular matter of the stay of the arrest should have also gone back to the Constitutional Court and not the Pietermaritzburg High Court.
And Ziyanda, we know it's going to be a virtual sitting. Perhaps that's what helps us come to terms with a sense of normalcy, really, behind you. I see joggers going about their day. Give us a sense of the mood where you're at and whether or not it's being affected by the stakes here.
Well, you know, part of the reason why we even here was, of course, the anticipation and awaiting the outcome of that Pietermaritzburg High Court judgment later on this morning. But now that the police minister has written this letter, not court papers, as both of you have aptly reflected, but just a letter to the office or the Constitutional Court, I should say, it doesn't seem like there might be an activity. We know, however, that there were some plans to go to the Pietermaritzburg High Court that was being organized by those operating under the banner of RET champions, and as well as here outside the home of former President Jacob Zuma. But as it stands, you know, the assessment is that seemingly there won't be any arrest of the former president pending attending the hearing of that rescission judgment, because another implication here, Ayanda, would have been that if the former president was arrested within these 72 hours and then the rescission and then the Court decides to rescind its judgment, he would have been prejudiced and unfairly jailed, albeit, you know, for those few days.
Thanks very much for that, Ziyanda Ngcobo. I'm sort of flabbergasted by the level of fitness it must take for the former president legally to go through these hoops, including that gentleman there in the background. 30 or so push-ups there. Well done to you.
All right, we'll keep watching this big story nonetheless. Let's take you to the Pietermaritzburg High Court now in KwaZulu-Natal. That's where some of Zuma supporters are actually expected to gather during a virtual hearing of the application to try to suspend the impending arrest. It's also where we find our Karinda Jagmohan. And Karinda, we've become accustomed, aren't we now, to supporters rocking up outside court, even in a context where the hearings themselves are virtual.
Absolutely. Good morning to you. We do expect a number of supporters, Zuma supporters, to gather outside the court. The virtual hearing heard by Judge Bhekisisa Mnguni is expected to start at around 11:30. It's quiet now on the streets outside the Pietermaritzburg High Court. I'm also not seeing any police presence at this moment. Now, we do understand that court processes here at Pietermaritzburg High Court are taking place as per usual, because this specific urgent application by Zuma to stay his impending arrest is being heard virtually. But we do expect a number of Radical Economic Transformation members, among other Zuma supporters, to be here around the time of the court hearing. And of course, this is to add some sort of impact, if it could add any impact, if any, to any judgment that might come out of this court. Now, of course, there are questions around whether or not this Pietermaritzburg High Court has any jurisdiction to even hear or make any orders on this urgent application, because, of course, the first order that was granted that has begun this situation unfolding currently around Zuma was made by the Constitutional Court, the highest court in the land. So, of course, there are questions on how long exactly this court process will be, whether or not the court, upon even starting this process this morning, will further hear this specific application. And this also comes as well at a time when we see a letter by the police minister as well as the National Police Commissioner on behalf, or rather the state attorney on behalf of these groups, saying that they will at this point suspend any attempts to arrest Zuma because of the litigation that is before court, the court processes currently, whereby we're seeing this application, but as well as the application to rescind court orders that will be heard on the 12th of July. And it's also unclear at this point what impact this particular court, if they do continue hearing this application, if this will have any impact on what the police minister has had to say via his state attorney in terms of suspending those arrest orders. But at this point, though, we do expect to see perhaps some people gathering here. Of course, we do know that because it's a virtual hearing, we won't see anyone in terms of Zuma's legal team present here in person, because it will be a virtual hearing. But we do expect to see supporters, and even in court papers as well, Zuma's legal team has made mention of the supporters that gather around him. Specifically, in the most recent papers he's filed with regards to this application, he's pointed out to the situation that has unfolded outside in Nkandla, and saying that at this point nobody would want to really have another event such as we saw the Marikana massacre happen years ago. This is written in court papers as he responds to the Zondo Commission, which has opposed this urgent application to stay his imminent arrest.
Karinda, very, very quickly for us, does it get underway at 10 or 11 this morning?
At this point, from what we hear via the court channels, or as well as the NPA, we see that the briefing says 11:30. We'll also be confirming this as well, but still it's quiet outside the Pietermaritzburg High Court. We expect around possibly 10 for supporters to start gathering here,
right,
and perhaps also have some words to say with regards to what's unfolding.